Good afternoon, everyone. A sincere welcome to those who are here on site, benefiting from the cool temperature of the auditorium, but also to those who dare to stay connected on Zoom after a very long day of classes. The topic of our plenary session, migration, is one of the hottest and highly debated and disputed issues heading the global political agenda. And there are many reasons why migration could be considered as creating a mutual advantage situation for both the immigrants and the hosting countries. It is common knowledge that Western nations are experiencing a demographic winter. In Switzerland, because of the low fertility rates, the number of inhabitants who are close to retirement is definitely higher than the number of young people who are about to enter the labor market. In other terms, the Western countries will soon face a shortage of workforce, and without migration, they won't be able to provide a range of services to an aging population and will certainly experience difficulties in assuring the good functioning of their economies. Fabrizio Mazzonna, a colleague from the Università della Svizzera Italiana, has published two interesting papers on the impact of immigration on the health status of native workers and on the distribution of work-related risk of injuries in Europe. And two results have emerged from his research that I would like to underline. In Germany, immigration has lowered the residents' likelihood to report negative health conditions and reducing the average workload. These effects are concentrated in blue-collar occupations and are larger among low-educated natives. In the UK, immigration led to a reallocation of native workers towards jobs characterized by lower physical intensity and injury risk, with the result that immigration reduced the average physical burden of UK-born workers with medium levels of education. In spite of these undeniable benefits for the local labor market, for the domestic economy, and for the health of the natives, the political debate in Europe, but also in the United States, is dominated by fear, by hostility towards migrants, no matter if we are talking about migrations from neighboring countries for employment reasons, or if we are speaking of political refugees or migrations from the global south. Let me speak 1 second about Switzerland. A popular initiative called No to a 10 Million Switzerland was recently launched. The initiators identify uncontrolled immigration as the main cause of many serious problems facing the country, namely housing crisis, energy supply, traffic, rising health and social cost, or even security. And in case of success in the popular ballot, the Swiss government and parliament would have to take action if 9.5 million people are exceeded in Switzerland before 2050, so as to prevent it from reaching 10 million inhabitants. Switzerland could be forced to cancel the agreement on the free movement of persons with the European Union. So, to talk about the topic of migration, we have this evening two excellent speakers. Dr. Afona Chernet, researcher at the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute, has earned his Bachelor of Science in Applied Biology and Chemistry from the University of Asmara, Eritrea, Master in Neurophysiology in Japan, and a PhD in Epidemiology at the University of Basel. Currently, he is pursuing his career as a Migration Health Advisor and the Global Health Liaison Officer at the Swiss TPH. Dr. Chernet is connected with us via Zoom, so it will be an hybrid plenary session. Flavia Cangià is a social anthropologist conducting interdisciplinary research on diversity, mobility, and migration issues. She received her PhD in social anthropology from the University of Fribourg, has worked at the Institute of Psychology and Education of the University of Neuchâtel, and as senior researcher at the University of Fribourg. She's currently lecturer at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences of the University of Lausanne. So I hand over the floor, first of all, to Afona Chernet in Basel.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are enjoying the beautiful Lugano and this nice, very interesting course program for me. Intensive, but very enriched with a lot of diverse courses. And I thank you all the organizers for this successful course and for inviting me to present this interesting course of migration health. And I really thank you, Luca, for this very great introduction. I'm grateful for that. So without further ado, let me present my keynote for today. As Lucas said already, migration is a growing, actually, we say it is still very much growing in all aspects of the countries globally. Means one of the agenda of UN discussion themes, including individual countries and globally. So today I am going to briefly discuss about migration health, and we will focus mainly on mental health, which is why we focus on mental health. It is the backbone of health, I would say, because without healthy mental health, then all the other things will not be functioning, and especially for integrating and being productive. Because as Luca has mentioned, all the migrants to be productive, to be contributing in the economy or security, they should be very healthy. And then the mental health is very important to learn the language, to go to school, develop skill, contribute. All these things are mainly dependent on the mental health aspect. So that's why we'll see briefly, and then we'll go on the question and discussion. So as you can see from this recent published report of the UNHCR, this is a trend of the forced migration, which is in recent years, especially as you can see from 2012 to 2022, within 10 years, it has increased substantially. So we have more than 110 million displaced migrants all over the world. That means 1 in 6 of people living in the world are displaced from their places, or they are not being residing in their original places. So having said that, it's very important that we don't have to generalize what this means, what is movement. These are forcibly displaced, but also there are people who are moving peacefully without force, and we have more than 300 million people. These are not included in the forced displaced people. This could be for study, for family union, for tourism, for work, for all of activities, for all of the diverse activities. Now, for now, what we will focus here in our presentation is this forcibly displaced people from their places. So to define what migrants are is very important. Who are the migrants? Who would you call them migrants, and how do you define them? So migrants are, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that there are people who move from one place to another place. It doesn't matter. It could be internally, it could be border crossing, could be continent crossing, but it's just a movement. So in this context, the migrants are considered as people who have moved impulsively without any force or any prosecution. And the asylum seekers are people who have applied for asylum according to the 1951 Refugee Convention of Geneva, UNHCR. These are the people who are fear of survival, or are fear of persecution, or are fear of being killed. So they need for protection, and they need secure place. So these people are the people who are basically they move from one country to another country. From their home country, they cross the border either legally or illegally. They migrate and they look for a protection and a safe place in another country. So these are the asylum seekers who have been claiming for a safe place. They are the people who are in the process. But we call them refugees once their process or their claim being accepted by the country, hosting country, so they are being known as refugees. And what makes them different from the migrants, or even though they are migrants, but the general migrants, we call them are these refugees, they are not legally arriving in the country, so they need to pass through a lot of paperwork, a lot of political challenges, all these things. And most important is they are not arriving on legal basis. For example, they are not arriving by plane or by boat or by bus, but most of them, they arrive illegally and they have passed through very arduous conditions. So they have to be escaping from border controllers, from smugglers, all these things. So they have a lot of life-threatening challenges. So what makes people move from their countries, or what makes them, how do they move? What are the driving forces or the factors that make them move or to move, they decide to move? So generally, they are divided into three as major and minor meso factors, or macro, meso, and micro factors. So the macro are more or less affecting all people in the country, or majority or large population. And this includes political instability, environmental conditions, social aspects, economics of the country, demographic of the country. So for example, if you say political instability, could be war, conflict, civil wars, or persecution, or political views, or freedom of speech. Could be also in the environmental aspect. These are driving forces that make them people leave their lands. For example, the production of their land, and then they have to move from urban to rural, to urban. So these are people, first they move internally, they leave their countries, their villages, or their production lands because of the rainfall or climate change, and then they move to the cities. And then from the cities, when they don't have enough jobs or they are unemployed, they have to look for another opportunities, and they cross the border and they live in other countries. And the social aspect is also looking for education, family reunion, economical aspect, just mentioned, economical opportunities, looking for better life. Demographic, also this is the density of the population, and also the prevalence of disease. So in this case, people, they might move for other countries. For example, if there is health system is very poor in a conditions like the developing countries, if they look for better health treatment or diagnosis, they have to move to another country. And in the meso there are obstacles, you can say facilitators, or they are in the medium catalysts, because of kind of they are technologies, cost of moving, or networking with people outside or inside. So that is very important, that they have networking or navigating their pathway to reach their destination. So these are more catalysts. And the micro, they seem small but very important. Their significance is very important. The age, sex, ethnicity, education, religious aspects, language proficiency, all these are very important because these are means of survival. For example, if you say the age group, it's very important that if they can make the way, for example, if somebody is making this travel from Congo or from Ivory Coast or Mali or from Afghanistan on the way to Europe, to Switzerland, for example, if they have to pass all these countries, they need to be physically fit. They need to be very much competent. And then when they arrive, they need to have a competence, because of technical competence for integrating and surviving. These are some kind of language or religious aspects or technical aspects. So this macro, they have equal contribution to the macros. And then all this makes them decide either to stay or migrate. And then on the way to their migration, there is a conceptual frame. In this case, when you put them, just presenting it briefly, in health aspect, how does their health aspect affect it? So we're considering this migration. Migration affects everybody, including the children and the adults, but how does the health aspect affect them? Does it uniformly affect them? Or is it only influencing particular age group or society population in this group? So as you can see here, the conceptual framework here, we can see that the health aspect of migrants is affected even before gestation. During the gestation, pregnancy spread until adulthood. So why is this? Because people, they migrate and then all of the things can happen on the way. So some people, they are not staying only for days, but it could be for weeks, months, even years. So the life progress changes during the journey. For example, if somebody is migrating from Somalia, he or she can stay in Ethiopia for some time, then in Sudan, and then Libya. And during this time, there could be marriage, there could be child coming, and there could be, of course, growing ups. So it affects all aspects of the livelihood of the migrants. So, and these aspects, some, especially for those crossing some very challenging places, or most of them, they come from poor healthcare system facilities, and they cross, or the transit countries are with very deprecated or poor healthcare conditions, so they don't get proper treatment or proper access. And the reason is, one is that the health system doesn't support them for migrants, not alone for migrants or transit migrants provide support, but even the border countries, they are very weak to support them. And another thing is, those people who are illegally transiting through these countries, they run away from officials. They don't want to be trapped. They don't want to be imprisoned. They don't want to be asked. So they are away from the legal process. So they are more prone to health conditions, and then the part could be, especially they are passing through the North Africa. You can say the North African as an example. We take this is very arduous, very hot condition, and then they have to pass through this way, and then they don't have the proper supply of water and food, so they are exposed to starvation, exposed to dehydration, and then there is a health problem rising as a case. So on their arrival on the host countries, in that context, we are taking example Europe as host country and continent, and then if we see them, most of them, they arrive with depleted, very poor health condition. And some of the commonly reported, as reported by the British Medical Association, are these can be categorized into these 4 groups. And this is poorly controlled chronic condition, and not only poorly controlled, but also not diagnosed. Most of them, they might not have an access to diagnosis, or they didn't know they are going to be screened. In that case, that is, some of them, they don't have this, they don't know their blood pressure, they don't have their diabetic condition, so they arrive with poor control or untreated chronic conditions. Not only untreated, but also they might be running out of their medications on the way. So these are very, very much vulnerable to chronic disease. And maternal care, as I mentioned before, as they are running out of the officials, they don't want to be tracked, they don't want to be traced, they don't want to be imprisoned. They avoid passing through officials, then they have these maternal problems because they don't go visit the regular treatments. in checkups. And then untreated communicable diseases, they are not, for example, like TB or HIV or sexual transmitted disease or other parasitic infections. They are not only untreated, but also during their tours or during their journey, they can be contracted disease, infectious disease. For example, if somebody is coming from South Africa, crossing on the way, even though there might not be some infectious disease in their home countries, but when they cross through these countries, transit countries, they are exposed to infectious disease, be TB or HIV or other infectious transmission, or airborne or waterborne disease. And another risk factor is they are exposing to confined places. When they are confined, prisoners, or they are traveling in crowded, they are very much exposed to airborne disease and other diseases. So what is the fourth one is very important, which I mentioned today. The mental health aspect it's very important. And this mental health aspect, first, like mentioned in the previous slide, they plan to travel, but always it is not the same as they plan. So their expectation and their realities are very much different. So they have some expectation, they will challenge, but when they come to the reality is different, and then they are exposed to a lot of risks of mental health. And this is very important for their survival in post-migration or in their host countries when they arrive. So I would say these are, like I mentioned before, the adults and the children, they are both equally exposed to pre-migration, migration, and post-migration effects. So there are a lot of, as you can see on the screen, I don't have to read it, you can see it. There are a lot of individual factors and group factors or general factors which affect them. As you can see, children are 30% of the population of the world currently, but they account 40% of the migration of the migrants or of the illegal on the forced migrants. So they are equally exposed and they are equally harmed or affected by these conditions, especially on their mental health. As you can see here, before pre-migration factors are exposed to armed conflicts, for example, here in post-traumatic stress disorder. That's like 31%, especially women are more vulnerable for that one, and men are considered. And then major depression disorder, 25, and then generalized anxiety disorder. But this one, as you can see, the first on the right side, this is increasing even after migration. So this is a follow-up study, so a systematic review. It's a follow-up after the migration. The pre-migration has this 31% of PTSD, but after migration it can be increasing for lifetime. And then there is mental health during transit and pushback. Pushback is returning. For example, if somebody is passing through one country and then they is caught at in a border, and then they are forced and chained and imprisoned and they return back. So forced pushback. So this is a study conducted in Serbia, and then these are among the people who want to pass from Serbia to Bosnia, Croatia, Hungary, and Romania. There is a returning back to Serbia. And this is around 200 people interviewed. And then there is a great depression. We see 50% of them have depression, 37% they have anxiety, and 32% of them have PTSD. So this is the question that's been addressed. Why are you victim of psychological violence? Were you separated from family? As you can see, 80% of them, they are answering, they were exposed to humiliation, threatened, insulted in the transit. So these are some of the causes, factors. And then there's a proposal, as you can see, traumatic experiences both in transit and during pushback as determinant factor effects, and then they are directly proportional to PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And lastly, I would say this is the last slide. So in post-migration, also individuals have problems with dealing with language skills and social and community networking and living, working condition, unemployment, socioeconomic status. So all this have significant effect on their survival in post migration or in their host countries, and being successful in integrating in the acculturation of the community, which I think is very important. As Luca has mentioned, it's very important that they are cope up with their resilience, increase their resilience to forget their past and start fresh. This is very important. Their mental health condition, and this is what is missing as a gap that need to take this transit or transition windows period of resettling and reestablishing in a new country. So thank you for listening.
So I would like to hand over the floor to Flavia Cangià for the second speech.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for being here. To the organizer, of course, of this nice event, for inviting me to speak today. I hope you hear me well. Okay, good. I'm going to take a slightly different direction here. I would like to start by drawing your attention to an article that was indicated to me by a colleague of mine when I was working at University of Neuchâtel, researching the experience of expat people, expat communities and their families in Switzerland. My colleague came to me and asked me, indeed, why are some called expat and other immigrants? What do you think? I think the answer is definitely very large and is out of the scope of this talk. But I think that this article is interesting to start with because it encourages us to think and reflect about two aspects that I want to underline today. Migration and mobility, for one thing, are associated with very different connotation normally. That is why I will try to talk about mobility rather generally, where different forms of migrations are represent different forms of movements that mobility can take. Second thing, not all people move in the same way. That is definitely something we understand also from the what we talked about before and the Afona's presentation. It's very clear. Not everybody moves under the same conditions and at the same speed, and yet the imperatives of mobility, I think, imposing who move when and how, can impact the lives of many individuals nowadays, so as to complicate or at least think about the line between what is privilege, what is vulnerability. When I then began to research the experiences of refugees in Switzerland, I started wondering if there could be ever a thread that, while illustrating, of course, the uniqueness and inequalities of different migrants' journeys, could connect vastly different forms of mobility. I would like to share with you some of these reflections about how I found this thread. And during the time I conducted research as part of the two Swiss national centers of competences in research on the move and lives. In my research, I have been interested in the work transition of very differently, highly skilled migrants in Switzerland. For the first study, interviews were conducted with 30 families, expat families of various nationalities, including the accompanying partners. For the second study, interviews were conducted with 27 Syrian refugees, highly skilled asylum seekers and refugees in Switzerland. Of particular importance for both studies were questions about the professional life aspirations before and after migration, as well as the imagination of the future. That thread became apparent to me when I began to look at those moments where movement, migration stops or slow down, something that is called across the social science immobility. The term immobility, which came sort of prominent for many of us, especially during the pandemic, can be understood in many ways. It can be the result of physical barriers that stop the movement, can result from structural constraints and infrastructure that slow down the movement for some, while encourage the movement of other people and other migrants. This understanding of immobility particularly showcases the disparities that different mobile people face, as alluded to the introductory article. Immobility can also arise from a need to establish a sense of home and stability for those in motion, or even from the desire to remain and not to move at all. Immobility, as the anthropologist Gassam has put it, can even start before moving, It is often the feeling that life is going nowhere that creates in many the desire or the need to move to a place where the quality of the goingness is better than what it is in the space that we're leaving behind. Existential immobility is a complex condition marked by an ambivalence. On one hand, there is a feeling of being stuck, that life does not move on, while on the other, there is a desire and potential to surpass present conditions. I think desire is key here. In an open letter to researchers and educators, IVTAC invites us to rethink the impact of common damage centers research on marginalized communities, which tends to reinforce in a way an image vulnerability. Capturing desire instead helps to document not only the painful aspect of lived experiences, but also people's capabilities and visions on the future. It is in this ambivalence between damage and desire and the existential mobility of different migrants that I caught a glimpse of that thread that he talked about. I will then share the stories of two women, pseudonyms Ella and Wafa, a partner of a mobile professional and a refugee respectively. Wafa and Ella are both mothers, a different stage of their lives and careers. They went through very different journeys to arrive in Switzerland. However, these women present a common aspect. They have high qualifications and prior career plans that were interrupted when they moved. Today, they can rely on very different material and institutional resources to achieve their goals. The legal status of asylum seekers in Switzerland impacts their work transitions. The asylum migration channel to Switzerland has long been considered as a humanitarian and not skill-based. Asylum seekers do not see their education easily validated, can wait long before getting an authorization to work. They encounter obstacles to find a job with provisional permits. Switzerland rather seems to attract the immigration of the so-called expats, who often have an employment contract on their arrival and receive support from the employer during the move. However, repeated mobility can have an impact on the lives of the career of accompanying partners. While images of dual career couples where both partners can continue professional careers in mobility proliferate among these communities and among companies, partners in fact often encounter difficulties finding a new professional job also for their temporary permits. Despite the very different mobility regimes, respondents in both studies talk about a rupture in the professional life and portray a situation of uncertainty and vulnerability. They talk about the recognition of the qualification, language barriers, lack of information, and perceived gender or racial discrimination in job search. Respondents reported a sense of losing control over their lives, of losing resources on which they have invested until that moment. Ella is in her 30s. Once she aspired to research in career in academia. However, when she followed her husband for his career across different countries and she had children, she quit her university studies. The sense of excitement and adventure that was associated to the imaginary repeated mobility as an expat gave way to the realization of a constant change, making her feel immobile. My physical presence in her house reminded Ella at that moment that she doesn't have much to do during the day. I'm highly educated, have skills, and I feel they are seriously underused, she says. Like today, you came and I forgot that you were coming, but I'm not doing anything. Ella feels exhausted of the constant mobility for her partner professional life. Whenever she goes to a new place after the move, like a new supermarket, she says she feels lost and trapped in a certain domestic rules and routines, while the others are at work moving on with their lives. When I was in a supermarket during the day, she continued, I thought I was like workplace. I didn't exist. I thought about all the people who were at work, my husband has an important job, and I was shopping for potatoes in the middle of the day. Ella told me how she started counseling, meet new people, made new friends, and spent time doing what she loves, like writing or photography. Wafa's story paints a contrasting picture, of course. She arrived in Switzerland in her late 40s. While she was at first forced to leave her country, one a new destination, Wafa could not move from the reception center for months, and then once she was granted the refugee status, she faced restriction of movement again across cities or countries. She stressed her desire to move again when possible if she could not find a job that would match her qualifications. Wafa had led a successful life before running a healthcare business and raising a family. I had a good life, I had it all, she said. However, the displacement brought her face to face with the challenge of recognition and status loss. Like other asylum seekers, Wafa is is trapped in a paradox of mobility. The problem, Wafa explains, is not the local people, but those who work in asylum and integration system and view asylum seekers are all the same, vulnerable, passive, and unskilled migrants. Refugees often share how hard it is to deal with suggestions from social workers to give up their old professional life and choose a simpler job instead. Refugees often imagine learning a new job, and yet they mention feeling discouraged from trying to new things. Wafa also wants to move on and progress. She had plenty of ideas about how to do it, but her assigned social worker initially asked her to wait. I can wait, she says, to stay here only to sleep and eat and sleep. You need patience and finding something that occupies you. That's why I work. Although I hate this job, it fills up my time. I'm not saying it's not a good job, but I prefer my old profession. I've worked a lot for that, and I have experience. Both stories embody the paradox of mobility in a way, between the damaging ruptures and imperatives of mobility and the desire to find a way out and continue with life. Immobility in this context is not merely a lack of physical movement, but a state of existential uncertainty and hope, where individuals grapple with questions of identity, purpose, and belonging. Ella feels trapped in the role of a housewife, and she wishes for a more satisfying life beyond her domestic role. Wafa is struggling to break free from the level of refugees, the limiters' potential and aspiration. The stories of Ella and Wafa remind us that mobility is a complex journey that extends beyond physical and directional movement. It is an ambivalent process that involves emotional, social, and existential dimensions. They illustrate the paradoxical nature of mobility between damage and desire. On the one hand, an immediate solution to the damaging effect of mobility might be staying patient and wait. On the other, a solution is rather to embrace the imaginary that mobility can be an opportunity for progress after all, if not now, in the future. To desire to stay active with resilient creativity and find alternative resources. These resources might be more than an economic and class-based resources that are normally viewed as increasing the resilience of migrants after the displacement. They may be personal, like imagination and hope and motivation. They can be social, like a friend, a neighbor, a counselor, or a social worker, or symbolic, sport, religion, the internet, hobbies, or a volunteering job. Ella forces herself to get out of the house, meet with counselor and new friends, and does what she loves. I had just decided it must work out one way or another, she says. By insisting with her social worker, Wafa manages to engage in some training to stay active, a dressing, a media course, a cooking class. I'm the one who can change my life. I don't accept to stay like that, she says. Ella and Wafa's stories portray the systemic issues and barriers that create challenging work conditions for migrants, but also the capabilities and resourcefulness in response to these issues. Stories as such could inform about the unique challenges and needs for these people beyond the mere idea of individual job as an end goal marker for well-being. These stories offer suggestions for non-financial, social, and personal aspects that this individual may value as important for their well-being, as they need support and transition to a new location. People like Ella and Wafa, as different as the story might be, they all might share a common desire to revive their past professional life, but also learn new skills, come up with alternative resources and ideas, find new ways to occupy themselves, communities or leisure activities, and take charge of shaping their own path. In doing so, they can maybe rebuild or even reinvent their careers. Here I try to challenge the conventional categories of vulnerability beyond the categorization of the article at the beginning of the talk. Categories of vulnerability, after all, are not in either position. As Eastern Calabria and others put it, a person can be vulnerable to issues, but at the same time be self-reliant in other ways. Existential immobility and the resulting vulnerability linked to increasing job security and precariousness is a latent feature of contemporary life that now concerns diverse people of different stages of their lives, both mobile people as well as those who do not move. Thank you, and I'm open to discussion and questions.
As a conclusion, I think we have seen that there are different status of migrant workers. Maybe there is a possibility to do as a kind of career moving from refugees to migrant worker, but the big question is whether the mental health conditions due to the process of migrating, and also the process of being, let's say, accepted in a new society, create such an obstacle that make all these integration efforts very difficult. No? Of course, there is a capital, a human capital arriving in a country, and as far as I can judge, few Western countries succeeded in being able to put on value these human capitals. But this remains a big issue because there is a demand. The demographic winter creates a windows of opportunity for many countries to create better conditions for migration. But I think we are still very, very far away from a successful policy. So I would like to thank you for staying here. Of course, I would like to thank Afona and Flavia for their very nice contribution.